In tonight's news edition, the Prime Minister says Jordan is a key higher education destination and urges the ministry to maintain the kingdom's outstanding achievements in the field. Saudi Arabia says it welcomes any agreement that curbs Iran's ability to get nuclear weapons and accuses Tehran of meddling in regional affairs. And Greece's creditors prepare for the start of bailout talks in Athens after lawmakers adopt a second package of reforms. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, was assured on the readiness of the various military units and formations and expressed his pride in their combat level. King Abdullah met for a while with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the King's military advisor, General Mash'al Zabin, and discussed a number of military affairs. The King was welcomed by the Army Chief, His Royal Highness Prince Faisal ibn Hussein, and senior officers upon his arrival at the General Command of the Jordan Armed Forces, the Arab Army. Four projectiles fired across the border from Syria fell in an empty area in the northern district of Ramtha, but there were no reports of casualties or damage. Erbil Governor Saad Shihab said 3 of the shells did not explode, but one struck an uninhabited area near the border town of Turra. He denied that one of the shells caused a fire in a farmland near the border, but added that a security survey of the frontier pointed to a fire inside Syrian territory. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour stressed the need for reviewing higher education achievements that maximize advantages to maintain the kingdom's outstanding regional status in this field. He said Jordan is a key destination for tens of thousands of Arab and foreign students. Mansour spoke at a meeting with Minister of Higher Education and Scientific Research Labib Khadra and top ministry officials who briefed him on the ministry's 2016 strategy and executive plan. Khadra highlighted key constraints the higher education sector is facing, such as low government spending on higher education and the fact that the university education system is not aligned with developmental priorities. Other challenges, he said, are student apathy towards technical education, as just no more than 10% of students turn to technical education, and higher unemployment among university graduates. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and Expatriate Affairs Nasser Juri discussed the conflict in Syria with a delegation representing the follow-up committee for the Syrian opposition's second Cairo meeting. The delegation reviewed the commitments or the committee's efforts to implement resolutions of the second Cairo conference and the roadmap that had been agreed upon. The meeting tackled ways to unify stances of the Syrian opposition to achieve a political solution in line with the first Geneva Conference on Syria. Judi reiterated Jordan's support of a political solution to end the bloodshed and violence in its northern neighbor. UN envoy for Syria Staffan de Mistura held talks with Syrian Deputy Foreign Minister Faisal Miqdad and other senior government officials in an effort to find ways to end the conflict. He is likely to discuss the results of his current meetings with regional and international players, as well as influential parties. De Mistura began the talks in May, saying he expected to meet 40 or more delegations for one-on-one discussions in Geneva, including Syrian officials, opposition and civil society, along with representatives of governments in the region. Diplomats said that by summoning people to Geneva, the UN envoy would be in control of the process and the talks would be on neutral ground. U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter made a surprise visit to Baghdad to get a first-hand assessment of the campaign against Daesh militant group. Carter's visit, his first to Iraq since becoming Defense Secretary in February, coincided with an Iraqi offensive now underway to retake the fallen capital of Anbar province. The American defense chief said he would meet U.S. commanders as well as Iraqi political leaders, including Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi. Carter said he would also meet Sunni leaders, noting Sunni participation in the campaign would be critical to its success. A senior U.S. defense official said Iraq had shown some positive momentum in its engagement with Sunnis in the past months, and that Carter aimed to build on it. Representatives of Yemen's ex-leader Ali Abdullah Saleh are in talks with diplomats from the United States, Britain and the United Arab Emirates, the Cairo. Negotiations are aimed to find a peaceful solution to the crisis in Yemen and to lift the siege on the ground. Meantime, a United Nations World Food Programme ship carrying food arrived in the southern Yemeni port of Aden. It was the first ship to berth at the port since the conflict erupted in the country in March. More WFP chartered ships are on standby near Aden, carrying fuel and more food. The UN World Food Programme is working to channel food through Aden to people in need of humanitarian assistance, particularly in Yemen's southern governorates.
The vessel was carrying 3,000 tons of food, enough for 180,000 people for 1 month. We aim to get more vessels into Aden and into the rest of the Yemeni ports so we can reach Yemeni women, children and men in need wherever they are all over the country.
Saudi Foreign Minister Adil Jubeir said his country welcomed any agreement that curtails Iran's ability to get nuclear weapons. Speaking in a joint news conference with Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, the Saudi minister also accused Iran of meddling in regional affairs. Under the July 14th Accord, sanctions will be gradually removed in return for Iran accepting long-term curbs on a nuclear program that the West has suspected was aimed at creating a nuclear bomb, a claim denied by Iran. U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter was in Saudi Arabia yesterday to meet King Salman and security officials to reassure the Kingdom of America's support after Washington struck the deal with Tehran.
The Kingdom's position is that we welcome any agreement that ensures Iran's inability to acquire nuclear weapon and which contains effective mechanism, inspection of all sites, including military sites, and that there is also a mechanism to reapply sanctions in case of any violations of such an agreement by Iran.
Egyptian Foreign Minister Shoukry said his country had full cooperation with Saudi Arabia over the conflict in Yemen. Saudi Arabia is leading the Arab coalition that has carried out strikes in Yemen against Houthi rebels allied to Iran. Egypt is part of the coalition that has bombed the Houthi militia and army forces loyal to former President Ali Abdullah Saleh since March 26th. The Egyptian army said an officer and 3 soldiers were killed when a bomb exploded near Rafah, a town on the border with the Gaza Strip. Daesh militant group claimed responsibility for the blast. Egypt or militants in Sinai province recently claimed a bombing that heavily damaged the Italian consulate in Cairo and earlier attacked several military checkpoints, the fiercest fighting in the region in years. Separately, Egypt's Interior Ministry said at least 15 people drowned when a small boat collided with a barge and capsized on the Nile River. Security sources said 6 people had been rescued, while another 7 believed to have been on the boat were still unaccounted for. Fishermen blamed the captain of the barge for the accident, while some said a little boat was overcrowded as it was carrying 70 people. Greece's creditors prepared for the start of bailout talks in Athens after lawmakers adopted a second package of reform measures. The Greek Parliament voted overwhelmingly to approve the reform measures, and the European Commission welcomed the vote. This report has more.
Desperate times call for desperate measures. That's the view of Greece's creditors as the country prepares for bailout talks. Hours after the Greek Parliament passed a crucial bill to pave the way to fresh negotiations, many in Athens say it's time to face reality.
If we don't get the money, it will be worse. It's time for some people to realise that the drachma is not an option.
The most important thing for me is that Greece becomes a modern state, to have a proper administration and move forward.
Greece now faces tough reforms. Too tough, say some. Critics argue that Greece is now being asked to impose austerity that no other country in the bloc has ever had to. And Schroeder's Azad Zangana says there's still a possibility Greece may have to leave the Eurozone.
In the long term, the probability is still pretty high of Greece leaving the Eurozone. There are still concerns around the sustainability of its debt and the loans that have been made from international creditors to the Greek government. And also, as we've seen over the last year or so, there is a real concern that the politics in Greece is simply becoming unmanageable.
That's a concern to Eurozone peers too. After Greece was pushed to the edge of bankruptcy, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras was forced to make a U-turn on the bailout terms, creating rebellion within his party. Tsipras also faces the battle of winning back trust from the country's creditors. They're wary of his past actions and say he must now stick to implementing all reforms. There are a couple he still needs to address, including early retirement and a lower tax rate for farmers.
Back here at home, Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour lit the torch, heralding the start of the annual Jerash Festival for Culture and Arts. In an address during the opening ceremony, Amman Mayor Aqil Biltaji, who is chairman of the Higher Committee for the Jerash Festival, thanked His Majesty the King for his patronage of the 30th festival held in the ancient Roman city. He said the panel had diligently worked with the local community to enrich this year's event, which includes literature, theatre and singing, as well as local, Arab and international art and folklore performances and markets promoting Jerash food products and artifacts. Biltaji thanked the government for the logistical support it had offered for the success of the annual Jerash Festival. Security has been stepped up in the Kenyan capital ahead of a landmark visit by US President Barack Obama amid high expectations among Kenyans. Obama will land in Kenya tomorrow with a mission to strengthen security and economic ties. But his personal connection to his father's birthplace will dominate a trip that Kenyans view as a native son returning home. Kenya is a critical Western ally in the battle against the Somali al-Shabaab group, which massacred 148 people in April at a university near the Somali border. Obama is the first sitting US president to go to Kenya or Ethiopia, his second stop on the two-country tour. In Nairobi, he will give a speech to the Kenyan people, which is likely to highlight his personal connection to the country. Real Madrid held a training session in Melbourne under new manager Rafa Benitez. The football superstars will play Manchester City tomorrow in the third and final match of the International Champions Cup Australia. Benitez kicked off his tenure as Real Madrid boss with a frustrating 7-6 penalty shootout loss after a goalless draw against AS Roma in Melbourne on Saturday. Bayern Munich have confirmed they have reached an agreement with Italy's Juventus to sign Chile international Arturo Vidal. The 28-year-old helped Juventus reach last season's Champions League final and won Copa America with Chile earlier this month. The German club CEO Karl-Heinz Rummenigge had confirmed the deal with the Chile international will be sealed soon. And Italy's ageless wonder, Andrea Pirlo, trained for the first time with his new MLS club. The 36-year-old joined the New York City FC earlier this summer for an undisclosed amount. He will join David Villa and Frank Lampard in the debut season of the MLS team. Having won everything in Italian football with Milan and Juventus, Pirlo also won the World Cup with the Azzurri in 2006 and captained last year's squad in Brazil. Now, a look at the weather forecast. Moderate tonight across the hilly areas and relatively hot across the Jordan Valley and the port city of Aqaba. The Dead Sea should expect a low of 30 degrees, the first in the summer season. Tomorrow, dry and hot conditions will prevail across much of the country, with temperatures hovering around the high 30s in the hilly areas. Soaring temperatures are forecast for the Jordan Valley and the Gulf of Aqaba. Highs are expected to touch 43 or 44 degrees Celsius there. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To close, our top stories once again. The Prime Minister says Jordan is a key higher education destination and urges the ministry to maintain the kingdom's outstanding achievements in the field. Saudi Arabia says it welcomes any agreement that curbs Iran's ability to get nuclear weapons and accuses Tehran of meddling in regional affairs. And Greece's creditors prepare for the start of bailout talks in Athens after lawmakers adopt a second package of reforms. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. My name is Raad Lubtouj. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good night.